Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. To my left is Ben Kinsley, who is a co-sponsor, co-producer, and co-host. That's the one I forgot last week with Peter Welch.
Lots of hats.
Yes.
Indeed.
Could tell us a little bit about Imperium, your new venture?
So I have a, well, it's not that new, but I have a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors, and we do a whole bunch of different things. Mainly policy development and following things going on in the legislature and helping nonprofits to find their message, so communications, and find their audience. So if you have a nonprofit, give us a call.
He's definitely a policy wonk. You should check him out. And our special guest tonight is Anne-Marie Keppel. Anne-Marie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Pay attention, because Anne-Marie is a death doula. This is clearly something out of our normal range or sphere of topics, right? But we're going to be talking a lot about Anne-Marie's book that she wrote called Death Nesting, and we're going to put a picture of it up, and you'll see it's a fabulous book. I read it. It makes a lot of sense. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, this is great. I'm really excited about this because I read the book, and you and I have already talked, so I'm ahead of the game here. I even know what it is.
I have some catching up to do.
Yes, you do, so ask questions. Anyway, could you give us a brief, some information about your background? And you've got a great section in the back of the book about all that you've done and accomplished, so jump right in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in rural Vermont, very much by myself, playing out in the forests and with my animals. I'd pack a lunch early in the morning and head out into the forest. And that really helped to expand my entire view and understanding of how we work within nature. So it was very much incorporated into my entire childhood. And unfortunately, I had to go to school.
Bummer.
Yep. Most of us do that.
Right.
And I continued to not enjoy school all the way through high school because I had this really rich home life. So my mother was a kindergarten teacher and a Reiki master teacher.
Oh,
my
nice.
father was a school psychologist and a hypnotherapist and past life regression therapist, neurolinguistic programmer. And they had this way of talking to me about their work and their trainings and working through problems that was really enriching and helped me to really understand my world in a unique way.
I bet.
So I dove into my father's psychology books and my mother's books on energetic boundaries, but I really didn't have too much time for traditional schooling.
That's funny. Oh, I don't like it either, but it's not for those reasons. I was not good right through high school.
Yeah, some people just, like to learn through experiences.
That's true. Well, this has nothing to do with the topic here, but Vermont is the least church-going state in the nation. And I asked a group of people who were agreeing with that, why? What fills the void? And they said exactly what you said, nature, getting to understand how it all works together and feeling how rich and they went on, and I thought, wow, not bad.
Yeah.
Because that really fills, if they have a void, fills the void.
Yeah.
Gives you something to hold on to.
Yeah, there's something spiritual about being with nature.
Yeah, and I couldn't argue with them because it sounded good.
Yeah, and you're also just living with the cycles of nature.
Right.
And so it really incorporates life and death as something completely natural.
Right.
And so a lot of times you don't need anything beyond that. When you can find comfort in that alone,
Exactly.
that's enough to give you some peace.
Exactly. I was glad they answered me the way they did, and they just explained it. I thought, well, it makes sense.
So how did you come to study this, and what was that story arc? How did you get to writing this book and doing what you do?
Yeah, I was, for a long time I was an event coordinator, and I still am actually. I was coordinating fashion shows and weddings and festivals.
Right.
And it started to feel, after a little while, I was noticing that I just wanted to make a bigger show and a better show, and it was starting to feel really empty. Like I could never actually top what it was that I was trying to reach. Like there was no attainable goal. So we were talking about homeless people a little earlier, and I met my homeless friend Frank, and I just started working with him and then working with the elderly. I became a nurse assistant and a hospice volunteer, and I worked in residential care. And when my license lapsed, because I had another little girl, I have 3 children, and I didn't want to do nurse training or assistant nurse training all over again. So I was Googling, what to do, and I was like, oh, Death Doula, that sounds perfect. I've been helping people die, so why not get some training in it? So that's how this kind of evolved.
That's great.
Cool.
Well, from your book, it's not just being a death doula. You have funeral celebrant, home or family-directed funeral guide, and death educator. So these all obviously tie into the training you learned as a death doula. Did you tell me you went to UVM or what?
I did not take the UVM course. Okay. No, although that's a very good course, I've heard. I think that's about an 8-week training. I did a training which is based in Canada, in Cape Breton, and it was about a 300-hour course, 6 days per week for 12 weeks.
Wow, that's great. Speaking of being surrounded by the environment, that's a great place to be. It's fabulous there.
Oh yeah, this was online, but the woman, it's yes, she's very much down to earth and part of nature.
That's
my
great.
teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Conjures up some things in your head. But anyway, that's a fabulous place to be from.
So the way that I understand this is, you basically help people who are dying, and sometimes the family as well, which I can definitely see that being part of the process. And it is a process, right? Most of the time, or at least a process for the family, even if death itself is sudden. So what kind of services do you kind of wrap around that? And what does that look like? And it probably looks different for each family, I would imagine.
Yeah, so a death doula, let me back up just a little bit. We'll go into services. So a death doula is somebody who wants to help create or maintain an environment that feels comfortable to die in. So that's really broad. That's a very general statement. But what a death doula specifically is and does is, yes, care for the individual and perhaps support the family, but there's actually no governing body at this time. So it's not federally recognized, it's not state recognized as a profession. So this started off as a grassroots movement, noticing that we have great lapses in death care support for people who are dying and for their families. And of course there are hospice volunteers and chaplains that do great work, but they can't keep up with the amount of people that are dying. And so the healthcare system is in need of this support. And there are some organizations that hope to professionalize what a death doula is and does, and they'll refer to them as a non-medical holistic caregiver. And there is a place for them in nursing homes, in acute care. We need them. The work that I do is more individual-based, family-based, and community-based. So I try to educate the people that I'm working with so they can do the work themselves. So and it's almost 2 different branches that the death doula term is kind of, it has not been officially divided. I divided it in my book just to refer to these 2 different routes that a death doula can take. But what a death doula does is maybe bedside care, sitting vigil, creating schedules that feel manageable to the families, listening very carefully to what the dying person wants and needs, what will make their dying process feel comfortable, engaging in uncomfortable conversations, just being willing to talk about death in general. What does this look like? How do you feel? How is this impacting your life right now? And even stepping further into disposition, what kind of burial or cremation, or what would you like done with your body? So really just helping to empower the individual and the family with as much knowledge as possible to make it feel natural.
Right.
Like it's okay. So,
So it's interesting. I mean, it is obviously a natural process, but it sounds like almost like a facilitator. Like you're facilitating some of these conversations and bringing up topics that people may not be comfortable bringing up on their own. Right. That's not a general topic of conversation around the dinner table, family dinner. Be like, how do you want? What do you want to do with your body when you're no longer?
that's a great question.
Right. Yeah.
If nobody's actively dying, it can be a great thing to talk about, right? But as soon as somebody is actively dying, well, then it's a very touchy subject.
Right.
So it's good to have these conversations in advance.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And in some situations, maybe that hasn't happened.
Right.
So that's cool. And is it really is really focused on the person, right? And making sure that they're in a comfortable space. And it's not so much, I guess, doesn't sound like anyway so much that it's providing medical care. It's more a spiritual family support type care. Is that accurate, or?
Right. So the death doula training does not include any medical care. And so you're not trained to do any nursing or therapy or law, and yet in the training, you're supposed to know enough about the process that you can point the family in the direction that they should seek assistance. So you can help be the mediator in some of those situations, and bring in the people that you need to have the discussions. Yeah.
The last 3 funerals, and I don't know, maybe it's just because of my age, it's been a busy 6 months to a year, every other day, not really, but we're going to funerals of people that we know. And 3 of the last ones I went to, the dying person, actually wrote his or her entire service, what songs they wanted, what verses from the Bible, and it was really great. I thought, wow, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. I'm not so sure, but they were, obviously, and they were very proud of what they did, and they let it be known right up front that so-and-so wrote the service, and
that's incredible.
That was great. Yeah, because I think kids must be the most difficult for you speaking. At least we as adults are supposed to understand it a little bit, but when you've got kids in the family, do you have to work with them? I would think so if they're asking questions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do they get it, kids? I mean, I'm talking, like little ones.
They do.
Do they?
They do. It depends on what they have been told and what kind of conversations people have engaged them in. So if nobody has said anything, if they're always putting them in the other room with the TV, so that because this is an adult conversation and so they shouldn't be a part of this, they could be really actually traumatized by the not knowing more than the death itself. So, every child, every individual has their own capacity for understanding this, but it shouldn't be. I mean, how much do we even understand this as adults? Right. So some of it is just kind of being open and honest with them to the level that they can handle, and saying, I don't have all the answers.
Right.
And so what the adults model, the kids will tend to follow. But for instance, like my little girl, we had a home funeral. She knew that her grandfather was dying. This is my husband's father. And so we visited him in the hospital, and then he would come home and he'd stay with us. And so we said, he's very sick. And then as he progressed, we said, so he's going to die. He's not going to be here anymore. But these are the things we will still have. And these are the conversations we can have with him now. And when we were in the hospital, she would sit on the bed and read or color. And,
Yeah, right, just like...
he had oxygen hooked up to him. But, and so she was part of this whole thing. She could see what was going on.
Yeah.
At the very end, when he was on life support, we chose not to bring her into that situation because that can look very confusing.
Right.
And that's not, it's hard to explain all of the tubes and the machines and the beeps.
Well, there's so much commotion once they've passed away.
Yeah.
Unhooking them and making sure they're dead and pronouncing.
Yes.
Not good. Yeah.
But then we brought his body home and we had a home funeral right there in our living room. And she got to look at him. And I said, would you like to touch him? And she said no. But then before long, as people came and went, she started like putting little crystals on him and adjusting his blankets and putting flowers on him.
Oh my God, she'd make me cry.
Yeah, and it just became part of, people were crying and people were having conversations, and there was her deceased grandfather, but it helps to make it more normal.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
no,
that's not always possible. That scenario is not always possible, but she still says, I miss him. And so that's just one example. But if you can bring them in a little bit, it can help.
Yeah, and I think you can tell when they've had enough. I remember just some conversations with my daughter, and I would try to explain something, and all of a sudden I'd go, whoops, And so I said, well, we can talk about it some more if you'd like to later, and we'd just end the conversation. So you just feed them up to the point where you can tell you've gone one word too many, and well, they've had it. That's enough.
Yeah.
They move on. That's great.
Yeah, I think it's the point of kids are probably one of the toughest pieces of the equation, right? Because it's like, how much do you tell them? How much do you not tell them? Like, what do you let them see? But I think, cutting them out of the process entirely, creates more questions and potentially more issues than it solves. This is kind of, it's not a perfect analogy, but you see that a little bit with dogs too, right?
For sure.
Like if you have dogs that have grown up together that are friends or whatever and live together, and one of them passes away, and and the other one doesn't see that. Right. All they see is they get in the car and you go to the vet or whatever, and then the dog
it's
doesn't come
gone.
home.
That's it.
They'll spend weeks looking for the other dog.
Yeah,
Sure.
Exactly.
And kids are kind of the same way.
Yeah.
If they don't have some understanding, some finality of what happened, it's going to raise more questions than it answers.
So I was reading in your book that doula, the art of doula, has been here for just years and years and years, and all very ancient. Is it so much different now than what you've read about what they've done back in the beginning in the ancient times? Is it? I'm sure we've learned an awful lot of how to deal with people, but is it really different, or is it still sort of the same basic feeling calm and accepting what's happening? Because obviously everybody you talk to is talking about, I'm dying. That's when you go see people who are dying, you can't say, you don't know what to say.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, having not been in ancient times before,
right, exactly.
or at least that I remember, I'm guessing that what the human body does when it's dying is very much the same.
Right, you can't change
but
that.
what's very different is us as caregivers. We have changed how we care for the person who's dying. So, the art of caring for an individual, that's been happening since there was the very first death.
Right.
And this was all done at home for the majority of existence. So it wasn't really until the hospital boom of maybe the late 1800s to the early 1900s when there actually became an option to send your loved one someplace else. So babies were born at home, we died at home, for better or worse. If people had an option then, they may have wanted to send them someplace else. But that's not what, there was no other choice. So doctors would have to, you'd have to send for a doctor, and then the doctor may or may not be able to come for a day or a week. And so you were doing that care for it could be your child. There were, the vulnerable population remains the same, the very young and the very old. But yeah, without, sterilization, without antibiotics, these were just things you just cared for your dying at home.
Best you could.
So the other thing that has really impacted all of this is the very modern age of being able to go wherever you want to go. Families breaking up. You can get on a plane, you can move across the country, you can move across the world. You can look things up. Like we're externalizing a lot of solutions. So the internet has made us,
crazy.
Crazy. Well, that too.
Yeah, that too. Right.
So families are no longer staying together the way they
Yes,
did.
mine is, and it's all everywhere.
Yeah, you used to be able to, you knew your neighbors because you had to rely on them. So-and-so can make a tea to make your stomach feel better. This person can, do this. You had your resources within your community. And now we're outsourcing so much that the person who's very ill or dying gets sent someplace else, and the professionals take over, and there's an extreme disconnect from what's actually going on. And a lot of that is, it's not anybody's fault. It's how we've evolved with the pressures of productivity.
Towards the end, the people that I have known of have always wanted to go home to die. That's very important to them. I think they've just had enough of the hospital because it's nothing there that's theirs. It's not their blanket, their their quilt, whatever. And I think they have to go home. And I think they let them go home usually if they can, right? Just so they can die at home.
It's very few. I think 80% of people in the U.S. wish they could die at home, and only 20% do.
Oh, really?
And that's really
tragic.
reflective. And in Vermont, it's quite the same as well. There are a significant amount of home deaths, but more than double in acute care and nursing homes. And that's actually part of why I wrote this book, because people want to have home deaths. But very few actually do end up having home deaths.
There's a disconnect there.
Yeah. So, and it's not always possible. Of course you want to die in your own bed. That's where you feel the most comfortable. But for so many reasons, it's not always possible.
So one of the things that you said is that death care is like health care. Can you kind of explain that a little bit? We touched on it a little earlier, but what does that mean?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that this should be discussed heavily in governmental platforms. I don't know why people are talking about healthcare all the time without it also incorporating death care into it. So people who have, people who are on medications or who are very ill or who break a bone understand the importance of healthcare. Other people who are quite healthy are like, oh, it's just another bill that I have to pay. Why do I need this? So some people will end up using the healthcare system in that way, but everybody will die. So, and which has turned into a really medical experience, unfortunately. Dying is done in this medical way in this day and age. So why not incorporate and start the conversation ahead of time when people are healthy, and that talking about death and dying is also health?
That makes a lot of sense. I never, no, seriously, because we had that discussion Representative Ann Donahue is very involved in mental health. And she fought for years to get mental health included in the health care committee. It was always separate. And she made a lot of sense because mental health is health care. And it should be all discussed under one umbrella, and the cost of health care and kind of services that are available. And this can be costly too, speaking of. I mean, it's
Immensely.
huge.
Immensely.
Yeah.
And when you consider it, I mean, so it's something absolutely everybody will face. What are you going to do when it's your time to die? You know, we don't know how and in what way, but it will cost something, and it will impact our jobs and our community and our family, and sometimes in a really big way.
Yeah.
And there's so much pressure put on when a loved one's died, particularly if it's unexpected. You've got as a family, you've got so many decisions to make. You've got to write the obit, and you've got to plan the funeral, and get the relatives in from wherever they are, and people expect you to somehow have it all ready in a day or two, and I don't even know where you start. I'm assuming the funeral director would help you a little bit, but maybe that's something that you must get involved with too. What do I do?
Oh yeah, and all of that done with a completely broken heart.
Right, exactly.
And
the way we do it in the Christian religion is, once that funeral is over, people leave, and there you are after having this combined week of complete, decision making, every 2 minutes exhaustion, staying up late, and then everybody leaves. As opposed to the Jewish people that are sitting shiva, where they keep the family company.
I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I really.
It's so beautiful.
I know. Isn't that great? Because you don't just dump them. You walk back to your empty house with your loved one gone.
That's when it hits you.
Exactly.
Like after everything, the planning is done, the funeral's over. That's when it hits you. Because then you're just left with emptiness at that point.
And yet the Jewish people have it because that's pretty smart. You let the family maybe get sick of you after a while. They're there for 7 days and okay, now I'm ready to be alone. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do. It's a good thing.
So you said you went through some training, and there's training available at UVM, and I'm assuming other places around the region. What does that training look like? And you said the program you went through is 12 weeks. The one at UVM sounded like 8 weeks. What does that look like, and what gets you prepared to take on something like this?
Yes. Well, I think we'd be hard pressed to find the person who's totally prepared for death. Right?
I am not. Just
totally. I can handle anybody's death. I can handle anybody's situation. So the training varies greatly. In fact, there's a training out there that's just a weekend training.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
So
so you should ask.
They're walking away with their certificate. I'm a death doula. You need to ask.
Right.
And so they are being taught the same kinds of things, but how deep can you actually go into not only the studies, but your own contemplations regarding your mortality in 16 hours?
Yeah.
So you'll need to investigate. So there's a basic understanding of what a death doula does, and each of these trainings will do that to some extent, but the depth in which and how far it goes will vary greatly. So I also really want to emphasize the fact that I refer to it in the book as the modern death doula and the ancient death doula. So the modern death doula can have this certificate training, whether it's 16 hours or 300 hours, but there are people who have been doing this work and have sat with their loved one through the entire process and done all of the paperwork with them and worked to make the environment really comfortable for them, and done all of the necessary steps for helping somebody die in a beautiful, holistic way. And they didn't need a certificate to do this.
Right.
So I think you need to be really careful about, if you want to hire a death doula, investigating just like doing the work
Right.
to see how long their training was,
Right.
what kind of training was it. Have you ever been a hospice volunteer in addition to this training? Have you ever sat with anybody who's dying before? So just because somebody has their certificate doesn't mean that they're all set, ready to go.
Right.
And
There's other references, stuff like
Yeah.
that, I would assume.
And with this day and age, it's actually okay right now because, I mean, look at Yelp. Yelp is like weeding people and businesses out right and left, right? Not
Yep,
people,
right
but
now.
businesses.
Right.
So words will spread quickly if there is a bad death doula out
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And so I think we can rely a little bit on social networking to
Sort out the,
validate people's
Right.
work.
yeah.
But until there's some clear understanding, there's a lot of gray area. But there is with anyone who you could have a very bad therapist who
Right.
went through
Doing
years
more
of training,
damage
and
than
you're like,
not.
oh my God,
Yeah.
they said what to you?
Yeah.
Right.
Or like
Right.
or a bad plumber. I mean,
Yes.
it happens, and that's
Yeah.
why.
Well, I just
Yeah.
told Anne Marie before the show what happened when my father passed away, and we did all our crying, all our hugging, up until that moment, and we actually prayed that it would happen quickly because my father could not manage to survive if not all the gray cells were working. It would just be a horror for him and for us, and so we got up and left after Mom said that, Dad's passed away. We sort of got up and left. And the doctor got so upset that we weren't crying and hugging, and he said something to me, and I was like, what? What business is it of yours? It's how my family deals with things, so
Yeah.
back off.
Yeah.
But he was expecting us all to, but we'd already done that
Yeah.
for
you've been
like a
doing
week.
that.
We're exhausted,
In some ways, it's easier if it's not all happening at once. In some ways, it's more difficult.
Right,
I
right.
have
Like an emergency sort of
yeah,
unexpected.
and I've gone through this, or am going through this with both of my grandfathers.
Oh, dear.
Where my grandfather that's still with us has Alzheimer's.
That's
And
painful.
He was kind of the same situation that you're describing.
Yeah.
He was an engineer,
Oh.
and to see that,
it kills
someone that was so intellectual, and
Right.
seeing that he can see it slipping away from
Yep.
him, and we can see it slipping away from
That's
him,
the
Yeah.
hardest.
and it's like watching him die in slow motion,
Right.
and
right.
it's a difficult thing to deal with.
So now Ben knows about death doulas, but who would tell me about, if we weren't doing the show, when you're going through all of this? Does your doctor suggest it? Does the funeral director tell you? Who says, maybe, have you considered bringing in somebody to help? Is that how, or how, because I've never ever heard, except for the gentleman here at ORCA that suggested I talk to you, you've never heard of it.
No.
And we've never heard of it, and we're sort of pretty attuned to what goes on in this place.
Try to be.
Yeah, we're a little addicted to politics and stuff, but never heard of it. So who tells you?
Yes, that's a good question. It's one of the reasons I actually wrote the book,
Yeah,
because I
no,
was
it's
getting so many questions about, what do you do? What is a death doula?
Right.
I was repeating myself so much. I'm like, here.
Here,
Well, that's
read
great.
this.
Here, read
Start
this.
with this,
Yes, right,
and then
I'll
we
call
can
you.
talk
Yeah, right.
some more. There is nothing, there's no system for it yet. So yes, it's a lot of introducing myself to
Right.
social workers and lawyers and
Right.
therapists
Ah.
and doctors, and
Right.
I'm just saying, hi, this is what I do. And I do get calls from those people who say, can I refer them to you? And I always say, yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's have tea. You can meet me so that you'll understand who you're referring them to
Right.
and what it is that I do, and then you can head back out. But it's a lot of just making introductions and telling people that this is available.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see, I can see how this is, people would want to have this.
Yeah.
I can definitely see how it's valuable to people, and who's, the typical client for a death doula? Is it the person themselves? Is it
Or
the
the family?
family? Is it like who's making the decision to say, I want this person to come in and help with this situation?
Yeah, that is one of the most important parts of the entire equation when you're pulling this together. So some of these things it's really hard to actually teach somebody what to do in every single situation. So it could be the person who's dying themselves, and then that's great because you've already overcome the hardest part, which is that they're dying.
Right.
So they've already admitted that they're dying, and
Right.
they'd like to have some extra help, some services. It could be a family member, a spouse, a child, the child of somebody older who's
Right,
dying.
right.
But there are a lot of things that unfold from there. So if the person who's dying has asked you to come in, that's great. You know who your client is, you know who you're working for and with. But that doesn't mean that somebody from out of town, and another sibling from out of town is not going to come in and say, well, who are you?
Right,
My mom never wanted that before, so I don't know why she says she wants that now. Or it's somebody else who's brought in, and the person who's dying has not even admitted that they're dying yet.
That's got to be tough.
Yeah. So then who are you working for, and what is your job? So a lot of what I do, the main part of what I do, is just empower people, because I can't solve every family dynamic. I'll never be able to. I won't be able to complete every bit of paperwork, every bit of everything, put everything into place where it's
Right.
absolutely the perfect dying scenario where everybody is like, oh, wasn't that wonderful? I do what I can. I look for places that are easy to support, and invite others in to play a role and to help this feel natural, and just give them a lot of tools and a lot of information for them to work with themselves. So the moment there's tension, you have to decide who you're working for and when it's time to step back.
Oh, right.
So some of what I do is actually just put things into place and actually create an ethical will, which says this is the person who's dying, these are their wishes, this is what the environment that they would like to have established. They would really like this poem read after they die, or they'd like to hear this song as they're dying, and give it to them and kind of say, I'm going to step back now. You can invite me in again. And so just take it as one step at a time, rather than a contract that says, I will enter now and I will exit after the death.
Right.
Or at the time of death, whatever it happens to be. There's so many variables.
Really?
Yeah, sounds like it.
Well, I would think, and I'm sure in every family there's one person who may just not like the whole thing and stir up the pot and stuff, which would be very sad.
Yeah, well, even the word death doula is triggering for people,
Right.
which is why some programs, like the UVM program, has said end of life doula.
Right.
And I chose to stick with death doula.
Yeah, well, it's what it is.
Call it what it is.
Yeah, it is. So your book, as I said, I didn't read every single word, but I read it. But you have, as its title, Death Nesting. And you say ancient and modern death doula techniques, mindfulness practices, and herbal care. What does the death nesting, what is that concept? What does that mean, death nesting?
Yeah. So it's a couple of different things. The most obvious would be if you are preparing the nest for somebody who's about to give birth.
Right.
So, pardon me, you might go shopping to buy some clothing and a bassinet, and you might clean all the corners of your house, and you
Set
might
up a nursery.
yeah, and
Right,
set up
right.
some meal preparation. And so you're creating this space for this release to happen. And that's can be referred to as nesting. Some women do it when they're menstruating as well. They'll
Right.
just start tidying everything and stock the refrigerator with all their favorite foods or whatever it happens to be.
Yes. Susie Q's, just saying.
So when somebody is dying, you need other people to help you with this. But as humans, we like to create sacred spaces for sacred events. You know, we have wedding ceremonies, we have funerals, we have baby welcoming parties, and we should be doing the same thing for people who are dying. So creating an environment that feels safe and orderly for this release to happen.
What sort of, I wouldn't want to get specific so people would know who you're talking about, but what sort of things does the patient ask for? I mean, I thought the music was very interesting, that they wanted music playing in the background, but what other unique things do people ask for?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You know, it varies so much. There was this sweet woman who, when she was dying, I was a hospice volunteer, and she wanted a basket of kittens.
Oh, stop.
See, that's how I
Oh
want
my God.
I can already tell you what I want. I want a pile of puppies.
Puppies,
There we
that's
go.
what it is.
That's how I want to go out.
Yeah, really. All over the bed.
It was maybe February or March, a time when cats were not having kittens,
right.
and we were searching high and low for kittens, and we found them. We
Right.
finally found 3 little kittens, and they played on her and were curled up on her. But you don't know unless you ask.
Right.
And it depends on the stage that they're at. Sometimes people have denied they're dying for so long that they're actually no longer able to communicate what it is that they really would like.
Right.
Which is why I try to have these conversations, why so many of us are trying to have these conversations, so you can think of these things. For instance, I want the curtains open if it's a sunny day when I'm dying.
Right.
I want the sunlight. Please
Right.
don't block out the curtains.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. Well,
block
that's
out
important.
the light.
Right.
Yeah.
I just, all of the nursing homes around here have animals of some kind that they bring in. The one up by the hospital, they have this, I don't know what it is the biggest, it looks like a bear. This dog is enormous, and he is so gentle. And the patients from all different ranges of being ill, they love it. Their whole face just beams up.
That would make my day.
Exactly. Yeah,
There
that's
is
great.
nothing like animal support and love.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You know?
that's the truth. That's it.
that's very true.
So the definition of death nesting is really like when birds are preparing their nest to have the babies in the trees. It's just a comfortable place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part is that I go into is that you're really preparing for your death. Your death nesting is actually being done every day of your life. So how you live your life, who you
no
interact
regrets,
with.
Yeah, that's
and,
a biggie, I would
not
think.
just like checking off like, you know, your bucket list, but
Right.
actually like who you interact with.
Right.
Do you have a partner or not? Do you have children or not? What is your economic situation?
Right.
All of these things, some of them are completely out of our control, others are within our control,
Right.
will all contribute to when we die, whether it's sudden or whether
Right.
it's prolonged.
Right.
All of these things will impact your death.
It's your legacy.
Right.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
right.
I think of, a recent one that comes to mind is Jake Burton.
Yeah.
And who recently passed away, and the legacy that he left behind. There's so many people that
Right.
loved and respected him for everything that he did, the things that he was involved with, the causes that he started, the company that he built. Is just a testament to who he was.
Yeah.
And
There
to
was an
see
article written about him, wasn't there? Was it 7 days or
there
something? It
was
was really
several.
It was really great.
But you just to see the way that the community came together.
Right.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
there was a celebration of his life and
Right,
what he
right.
did and his accomplishments and the people that he touched.
That's great.
And they couldn't get enough people in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had. They did it at Stowe in the Performing Arts Theater. They couldn't get enough people in the
Wow.
building. They had screens outside.
Oh, really?
And people, and it was a celebration more than anything else. And I
That's
think
great.
that's a testament to who he was and what he lived for. And I think all of us kind of aspire to have
That no regrets thing.
The no regrets thing, right? To leave our mark, right?
Yeah. You know, there was also, that's beautiful, you're exactly right, because I believe he was very accomplished, but as I understand, he was also extremely generous.
Very
and a
generous,
kind
Very
person.
generous,
right.
yeah.
You know, and you don't have to be this extraordinary person to have your life impact others and have your death impact others in a positive way. So there was one woman that I worked with who had no children and no spouse, but she had this community of people. She was a teacher, and she had this community of people that really rallied around her, and they were able to take care of her through her dying days from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it did take work on my end because there was no central person. She didn't have that central person in her life to do all this, so I became that. But she'd worked so closely with nature, and it was just part of her vocabulary that her dying was as natural as she had lived her life.
That's great.
And so it was a beautiful community support around
That's
her.
great. We have about 11 minutes left. Excuse me, and I wanted to ask you about the actual process of dying, both physical and spiritual. Okay, because then I want to talk about the teen camps that you run and also the symposium, because that's really important. So could you talk about, you said sensory experience, it's physical change and the sensory, it's two different things going on sort of at the same time, and
Yeah, so what we see, what we're able to monitor is the breathing and the heart rate and your oxygen intake and your pulse. And, you know, oftentimes you'll spike a fever right before death. And these are things, you know, the breathing will become erratic. And these are things that are medically monitored and that you can see and gauge and witness. But there's so much more going on.
Well, most of I witnessed one of my closest friends dying, and she had that moment of everything was clear. She had this burst of energy at the end where you wouldn't even know she was sick. She was articulate, she was up and awake, and then went down. I don't know if that happens a lot, where there's burst of, I don't want to go, I want to stay here and be with you, and then of course it goes downhill pretty quickly. But it was an amazing thing to see, because she was completely bedridden, you had to help her get dressed and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden there she was, just her old self.
It is common.
Yeah, is it?
And why, I don't know.
Yeah. It's just that last hoorah, I guess.
Well, something that I think I've observed in the people that I've seen go through this, and is and you kind of alluded to it, there's a spiritual component to this as well. It's not just physical, because at the point where someone's done fighting, things happen much more quickly.
Right,
you have either that moment of clarity, that
Right.
moment of peace, and
And
then
then,
it happens very quickly. At that point, and you see this kind of in people that are fighting things like cancer,
Right.
for example, where they've made the decision to stop fighting, and it's sometimes 24
Right,
hours. I've seen
right.
that a couple times
Right.
where it's, you know, it takes a very short amount of time because they've decided they're ready to stop fighting
Right.
it, and they're just going
Or
to.
sometimes with elderly people, if they've had something happen traumatic, like a fall, that just sort of sets it off. Which somewhat happened to my mom, and you get something bad happening, sort of a gut punch, and then you just say, wow, and it slows down.
So something I think our viewers are probably very interested in, and all of us struggle with, is what do you say? What do you say to a
Yeah,
person
right.
who's going through this?
Right.
What do you say to a family member who's going through this? Because oftentimes they're having a harder time coming to grip with it than
Right.
the person that's actually
Yeah.
going through it.
Right.
And I know that's been true for me. So what do you say to people, and how do you handle that situation?
The best thing you can do is actually practice.
I can believe
Practice
that.
with
Yeah.
somebody who's not presently dying in front of you. Like, let's have this awkward conversation.
Right.
Let's practice a couple things, and then because it will happen, possibly even the
Right.
next day, you see that person. You're like, okay, I've practiced this. I've said it aloud a couple of times. So saying, I'm sorry. I'm
Right.
sorry to hear about your mother
Right.
is completely acceptable. The one thing that is, a lot of times people want to continue from there.
Right.
And they don't know what to say, so then they stop there. So sometimes what can be helpful is making a gesture, making an offer, but not open-ended. So a lot of times what comes out is, let me know if you need anything.
Right.
Okay, that's
Right.
completely
Right.
unhelpful.
Right, well,
It was
exactly.
well-intentioned.
Like they're going to call, they're not.
No,
Yeah.
no, there's too many things going on, and it's well-intentioned, but it's not ever actually going to be
Right.
fulfilled. So let's say you have a restaurant in town, and you say, if you'd like, you can bring your family in for a round of drinks, it's on me. Or perhaps you make the best pies ever, and this is something easy for you, it's very
Right.
natural, and you say, can I drop off a couple of pies for you?
Right.
So give them something very specific
makes a lot of
to say
sense.
yes or no to. Or, I pick up my children at the same time every day that you do. Would you like me to pick up your children for you this week?
Nice.
Something like that. So think about this ahead of time, because oftentimes you see the person, you're like, oh gosh, you know,
What do I say?
yeah, there they are. What do I say? If you already know this in advance, which you would
Right.
if you're trying to avoid them or
Right.
suddenly feeling uncomfortable,
Right.
think ahead of time. What's something that I can offer to them? Maybe
That's
you
great.
even keep something in your car, so if you run into them, you say, oh, I bought this candle for you. I'm so sorry to hear about your mother. Add this to your shrine.
Right.
Or so just thinking ahead of time a little bit rather than being caught
Right.
in the headlights, and just practicing this and thinking of what kind of resources you have that are easy to offer to somebody who is in a tremendous amount of pain and
Right.
confused.
Yeah.
So could you just tell us in the time we have left really about the teen retreats that you and your husband do together, and that's all year. I thought it was just summer, but you said it's all year. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then perhaps the symposium that you run, which must be marvelous.
Yeah. So the teen retreats are, my husband Pablo and I run them, and they are at Karmacholing, which is a Buddhist
Oh,
meditation
yep,
center
right.
south of St. Johnsbury. And there are different teachers that are invited, but my husband and I happen to do a lot of them. And we talk about every taboo subject that's out there, because that's what teenagers want to talk about.
Right, right.
And sometimes we'll open it up and we'll say, what would you like to talk about? And they know at this point that they can bring up anything. And oftentimes it either comes down to the stresses of work and school, like their school work and the
Right.
demands of them. Suicide is a very big topic.
Right, which we have the highest percentage of all in the nation, teen suicides here. Didn't Mary told us that?
Is that
Yeah, that's
recently?
true.
Because
Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And you know, one time, this was last year. So we do them seasonally. It's fall, winter, spring, and then we have a 1-week retreat in the summertime. But it's a full weekend retreat. Some of them are a week long. But one time there were 17 kids in the room, 17 teenagers between the ages of 13 and 18, and all but one of them had known somebody who had taken their life.
Wow.
And from there, many, I'd say at least half, had known 2 or more.
Whoa.
And it's something that is so painful to us adults
Right.
that we don't want to talk about it, and we're scared that if we talk about it, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
I just got goosebumps when I said that, because
Right.
that's not true. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about, yes, life is stressful. These are big stresses.
Yeah.
How can you use your breathing to calm yourself, to not make irrational decisions? How can you be kind and gentle with yourself? How can you genuinely ask your peer, how are you?
Right.
And be okay with hearing the answer. You know, so we practice having just very plain conversations with eye contact that is not through their phone. And it's no judgment on them using their phones, because we adults use our phones.
Yeah, we use them to
just
set the
as
example,
much,
right?
Just as much.
Right.
But that's a lot of what we do at the teen retreats. We go deep, and we eat a lot of food.
Of course,
That's
you
good.
have
I'll keep
to.
going.
Always
Well,
have to replenish.
When there is
like,
a teen suicide, the guilt on the family.
Oh,
Because the mother, the father, what did I do wrong? How can I
friends,
stop it?
and the
Yeah,
friends, because one of the things, there's a segment on NPR about this recently, where the friends of the teen are often more likely to have noticed something
for sure, they're afraid
than,
to say.
than
right?
the parents are.
Yep.
Oftentimes parents don't see it, either because they don't have that type of relationship with their child, or they choose to ignore it, or whatever. But the friends oftentimes do see something, and sometimes even try to intervene,
Right.
and are either not successful, or there's some other impediment there, and that is just as traumatic for them as it is for the family.
The teenagers feel a tremendous amount of pressure to maintain these relationships, even if it's just through Snapchat. They will, so in some of these teen retreats, we'll have them give up their phones for the week or for the weekend. And
Force the face-to-face interactions.
yeah, and also just, who am I without my phone?
Right.
Just really getting back to just like the core of who you are as a human being, outside of what everybody thinks you are, and what you have to
Must
maintain.
be a lot of bonding amongst the kids that week, I bet.
So deep.
Yeah, I bet.
And it's so nurturing. It's a break from the real world.
That's great. Can you just take a half a second to talk about the symposium, when it is, and it's the Death and Dying Symposium in Vermont.
Yeah, so I have a symposium that I run every September. This will be the 4th one in 2020. And I bring in teachers from every place where I can gather them that teach on their little subjects, because I'm an expert in absolutely nothing. And so I bring in other people, and then I look really good.
That's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it.
That's it. A good manager always lets their people shine.
Yeah.
That's great. And it's in September, so...
It's in September. I haven't named a date yet this
okay.
year, but it's held in Craftsbury at my house, actually.
Oh, nice.
Because I have a big backyard and a big living room, actually, that can contain a lot of people, and I put a tent out there.
Oh, lovely.
Perfect.
Anne-Marie, we've run out of time, and I really thank you for coming. We'll put your contact information up at the end of the video, so I bet you enjoyed this show. I certainly did. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.